Are you? All right, because I'm going to put you to sleep if you are, because this is a long reading, but it's very interesting. This is something from Max Lucado that is very, very good, very thought-provoking. And so I'm going to put this in the bulletin probably. It'll be a couple of weeks, obviously, because we're going to be gone, but I didn't want to put it in there now because, it's in my sermon, I didn't want to ruin it, and the element of surprise. But anyway, this is from Max Lucado. It is the heroin of emotions, the angel dust of the spirit, the cocaine of the soul, injected into our system with the intentions of recovery. It has the capacity to kill. It's available and alluring, and its dealers and users are often Christians. The name of the drug is pity. No one dependent on pity ever intended to get that way. The first experiment with a drug is usually a legitimate problem. A sickness, maybe cancer, a cold, broken leg. Perhaps it was taken to weather a crisis, death, bankruptcy, a divorce. Whatever the cause, the treatment is the same. Well-meaning friends treat us with pity, kind words, sympathetic gestures, empathetic tears, and most of the time the treatment has its intended results. Healing occurs, and we pick ourselves up and we continue with our lives. There are times, however, when a habit is formed. The attention and the compassion feel good. The sudden flood of love and warmth gives a type of high. Well-intended friends inject our veins with kindness, fill our room with the smoke of understanding. My, it feels nice. In fact, it's been a while since we felt such warmth and sympathy. So instead of fighting to get back on our feet, we allow ourselves the ease into this addiction. Motivation wanes, creativity disappears, and initiative exists. We love the process of healing so much that we don't want to get healed. Instead of getting better, we convince ourselves that we're worse. In time, we become pity junkies. We thrive on the compassion of others. We become masters of reciting our woes, and will gladly retell the tale to anyone who will listen to us. We bear our wounds to all who pass, begging for a sympathetic touch. As it is true with drugs, each dose of pity is less effective, and soon the pity from others is not stout enough, so we manufacture our own. We convince ourselves that we are a victim of everything. Our parents didn't raise us correctly. My boss doesn't respect me. Society expects too much of me. Nobody loves me. Everybody hates me. I think I'll go eat some worms. For those who follow this cycle to its end, there's a predictable final step, and that's anger. We've become so efficient at convincing ourselves that we are victimized by the world that the only logical reaction is anger. Anger at the world, anger at our family, anger at the church, anger at society. Self-pity has paralyzed us to the point that we become useless to the family, useless to the church, and useless to the community. Man, I read that and I thought, man, that hits like a ton of bricks because there's so much truth to that. We're all susceptible to this because we all, have a tendency of having self-pity, no doubt about that. We all have things going on in our life or have had things that have happened in our life and misfortune that make us feel sorry for ourselves, and we want the sympathy of others. And in the Lord's church, we have just that. I mean, it's a beautiful thing when you think about like Romans 12:15, to rejoice with those who rejoice, to weep with those who weep. And so crisis hits, something happens in our life, whatever that is. Maybe it's a divorce, maybe it's marital problems, maybe somebody did us wrong, maybe we lost our job, maybe it's health problems, maybe somebody didn't talk to us a few times. Whatever the case is, we get offended about different things, we feel sorry for ourselves, whatever that case is. And so well-intended and loving friends, sometimes family members and members of the Lord's church, which are really all of them, I guess, they surround us, they care for us, they cry with us, they empathize with us, they cry for us, they help us out in different ways, they check on us, and that's great. And hopefully that leads us to getting back on our feet from whatever it is that we're going through. But there are occasions when people enjoy that just a little bit too much. They crave that attention. They enjoy all the attention they're getting from everybody. They love people calling and asking, people maybe bringing stuff by and checking on them. They love to tell about their woes and stuff, and people showing their concern, and I'm so sorry that that happened to you, and is there anything and they get to the point to where they love that. So much so that Max Lucado calls them pity junkies. And man, when I read that, I thought, wow, that is a big problem in our society today. Amen? Man alive, if you don't think so, then you've been sticking your head in the sand, because it is a huge problem in our world today, and it's a problem in the church as well. And I realize that we're no different than everybody else, that we're susceptible to all the same things, but we should be different in the sense that we should not be as weak as the world, but yet we see so much of the world in the church today. And this is one of the areas that I have seen in the last, I would say, especially 5 years, so very much. And it is so discouraging in so many different ways, and it's so frustrating, and it really cripples us as the Lord's church. And so you might be thinking, okay, well, that's not me. How many of us today, don't raise your hand, by the way, but how many of us tonight are thinking about somebody? You've got somebody in your mind. I do. I've got several people in my mind, because I know a lot of people like this, How many of us are thinking about ourselves? Probably very few, because we have a problem looking in the mirror and realizing when we have a problem. So how do I know when maybe I'm a pity junkie, when I kind of fall into this category, and when I don't get back on my feet the way that I should, and I kind of milk that sympathy maybe for all that it's worth from my brethren or family, friends? Well, one thing, and I'm not going to go into all of this big article that I read, where I read this from, but one main thing that stood out that is a main indicator of this is when all of your thoughts and when all of your conversations come back to yourself. They focus on self. In other words, when you're talking to somebody and maybe they're sharing with you something that's happened in their life. Maybe it's a sickness, maybe they lost somebody, whatever it is, and they feel bad about that, and they're telling you about that, and somehow that conversation comes back to you. Now, I don't know if you've ever done that, but I've done that a lot. I have had people do that a lot. In fact, I remember, it's been many years ago now, but I was struggling so very much with something that was going on in my life. And I was preaching some at the time, but I was not a full-time preacher, so I had a full-time preacher. I had a preacher, okay? So my preacher, I went to him with this problem, and I was crying about it. I was very upset, and just spilled my guts to him. And I'll never, ever forget this. Somehow in the conversation, he never prayed with me. That struck me as odd. He never just said, let's pray about this. He never tried, and if you don't have advice, that's fine, but at least try to comfort somebody. It went right back to him. He began to talk about himself and some problems that he had, and that was that. And that will forever stand in my mind. Some people are like that. And so that's one of the main indicators. And so let's turn to John chapter 5, and I want to look at a passage that maybe it's a little bit of a pity party. I'm not really sure, but some of the things that I've read about this, and if you watch The Chosen, I recommend that very, very highly. It actually depicts this event as being kind of a pity party. And I don't know if it was or not, but I think that there's a lot that we can learn from it anyway, even if it wasn't. John chapter 5, and we're going to read the first 15 verses there. After this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool, which is called in Hebrew Bethesda, having 5 porches, and in these lay a great multitude of sick people, blind, lame, paralyzed, waiting for the moving of the water. For an angel went down at a certain time into the pool and stirred up the water, and then whoever stepped in first after the stirring of the water was made well of whatever disease he had. Verse 5, now a certain man was there who had an infirmity 38 years. And when Jesus saw him laying there and knew that he had already been there in that condition a long time, he said to him, Do you want to be made well? Then the sick man answered him, Sir, I have no man to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. But while I am coming, another steps down before me. And Jesus said to him, Rise, take up your bed, and walk. And immediately the man was made well, took up his bed, and walked. And that day was the Sabbath. And the Jews therefore said to him, who was cured, It is the Sabbath. It is not lawful for you to carry your bed. And he answered them, He who made me well said to me, Take up your bed and walk. Then they asked him, Well, who is the man who said to you, Take up your bed and walk? But the one who was healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn, a multitude being in that place. And afterwards Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, See, you have been made well, sin no more, lest a worse thing come upon you. And the man departed and told the Jews, and it was Jesus who had made him well. Very first thing I want to notice about this is that Jesus is a people person, right? And we talked about that last Sunday in talking about the wedding. We're about to do a lot of studies on Jesus because that's what I'm doing right now. And I love to study about our Lord. He was a people person. And one thing that shows this is verse 6 here. So if you look at verse 6, it says that Jesus knew about him. But if you look at some other translations, it actually says Jesus learned about him. If you look at the original language and put it all together in the context, it appears to be something that Jesus learned about. So what's the difference? Well, Jesus took time to learn about him. Now I realize some people would say, well, Jesus is God, you know. He knows all things. Well, yes, but if you go back to the gospel accounts in Matthew chapter 3, Luke chapter 3, you see that he learned just like everybody else, right? And so there was a learning process. And so I believe that Jesus learned about this man. In other words, he cared enough about him to maybe inquire, maybe ask about him. Yes, it was probably common knowledge that he was there because he had been there for such a long time. But I believe that he cared enough to confront this man and probably took time to learn a little bit about him. Now, there's a lot of lessons that we can learn from this, and one of them is taking time enough to learn about other people, to inquire, to ask about, to see about other people. When we're so self-absorbed, and I believe that this guy probably was, because who in the world is going to have an ailment for that long and not have some of that they deal with? And I realize that nobody wants to be crippled, especially for their entire life, but that's going to lead you probably to having some self-pity more than likely. But I believe that Jesus took the time to be there for him, to see what was going on, and to help him. Now, I think about the Lord's church. I think about us as individual Christians and how we're all supposed to do that. But I also think about the different ministries, the different positions, if you will, offices, whatever you want to call it in the Lord's church, as a minister, a preacher, as elders, as deacons, as different ones. I want to challenge you to do this. This is interesting. Every single office that you find in the Lord's church is a people job. Every last one of them. Even say deacons, that's about, working. Yes, but it's for the people. And if you look at the examples and the different passages even having to do with, say, deacons, it's about people. And so this idea, one of the things that is kind of a soapbox, so I'm not going to go off on it, but one of the things that kills me is that it's one of the problems in the church is a false idea and mentality when it comes to leadership. And especially elders in the church, and especially preachers as well. But for instance, elders are not CEOs. They're not. They make decisions in the Lord's church. That's good. They can actually delegate so other people can make decisions as well. But they're not bosses. They're not to lord over anybody, as 1 Peter chapter 5 says, right? And they are to be people. They are to be about people. One of the things that you see about elders in the Lord's church is that they are shepherds, first and foremost. It's not about sitting in a meeting and making all the decisions for what's going to happen with that congregation. It better be about people. They better be talking about the ones that haven't been there, that's been going through struggles and things, and they better be inquiring about that because they're going to answer for that. And that is a major problem in the church today, is a misunderstanding of what leadership is. It better be about people, and every one of us better be about people as well, because that's what you see overwhelmingly. Now, notice as we change gears, how can I avoid a victim mentality? I don't want to be like this, do y'all? And we're so susceptible to that but we don't want to fall into that. So let's look at three different things that Jesus says that I think will help us to not fall prey to this victim mentality. So the first one is found in verse 6. Look at verse 6. Verse 1, all of them are statements from Jesus. The first one is a question. Do you want to be made well? Have you ever thought about that? Have you ever thought about how ridiculous of a question that is? Yes, it's the Lord that's asking it, so I hate saying that, but seriously, that sounds like a ridiculous question. Do you want to be made well? Are you serious? He's been like this his entire life. He's been sitting here for 38 years. No, he hasn't been sitting there for 38 years, but he's been there for years and years and years. He's been waiting to be able to get there and be healed. You know, of course he wants to be made well. Really? Maybe not. Is it so far-fetched that some people that are sick do not want to be made well? Oh, yeah. Yeah, it happens, right? I've met, I can remember years ago thinking that nobody existed like that. Well, I repented of that. I have changed my mind over the years because I have met many people like that they don't want to get well. You say, why in the world would somebody not want to get well? Well, for one, it's an excuse. People use it as an excuse. I don't feel well. This has happened to me. I've had a bad experience. I've gone through this. I've gone through that. And so it gives them an excuse to not get involved in things they need to be involved in and not take responsibility in things that they need to be responsible for, not to man up and do things that they know that they need to do because, oh, poor pitiful me, after all, look at what I've been through. So it gives them an excuse, and they don't want to get well. They don't want to move on. They don't want to get back on their feet. But something else that kind of stands out is that they love what? Somebody that's like that, they love attention. They love attention. They love and crave people asking about them and talking about them, about, oh, poor pitiful, brother or sister so-and-so, and look what they've been through. They love the people to bring them food and stuff and to check on them and to do stuff for them, and they get offended when you don't ask or you don't do something for them. And so I believe that this is a real problem. Maybe this guy had this, maybe not, but look at his answer in verse 7. Do you want to get well? Jesus asked him, and his answer is, well, I have no one to help me while I am trying to get into the water. Someone else, as some translation says, cuts in line. Cuts in line. Now, that's probably legitimate. He probably couldn't get up there, but it kind of sounds to me just a little bit like he's blaming. He's kind of blaming. And if you think about this kind of problem and this mentality, that's exactly what happens. We blame other people, do we not? And we all can do that. It's so very easy when it's a legitimate thing that somebody has done for you. And our society is so eat up with this today. It is. And one of the ways, and I don't know if you've ever Googled any of this stuff, but one of the ways that you can see that this is a real problem in our culture today is by looking at lawsuits. Have y'all ever looked at any of that online? It's funny and it's sad all at the same time. So I looked, and in doing this study, I've looked at a few this past week. So there's a man that was in California who he wanted to commit suicide, so he stepped out in front of a subway train. That's a way to do it. But it didn't kill him. But it injured him really bad. Well, what do you think he did? Yes, he sued the subway. Get this. And this is really not maybe all that much money, but it's a whole lot of money to me. He won $650,000 from that. Can you believe that? Can you believe a judge actually ruled in his favor? Oh, poor pitiful me. He's trying to kill himself, and he sues the subway because it just hurt him. So here's another guy. Now this guy, and I don't remember what state this was in because I didn't write it down on here, but anyway, he broke into a school, city school, by coming in through a skylight. And in doing so, he cut himself up pretty badly, and so what did he do? He sued as well. And so he gets $1,500 a month for life because he was breaking into a school and got hurt. Okay, now this tops it all. All right, here's a couple of people who have their neighbors, and they have a hedgerow between them, and they want to trim up that hedgerow But neither one of them had the equipment to do it. But they do have a push mower. And so they get that push mower, one on each side, crank that bad boy up, and they begin to trim those bushes. I wish I had a video of that. And so it slipped, of course, and it severed 2 fingers from one of the guy's hands. So what happens? He sues Sears. I think it was Sears, but anyway. And so I know stuff like that. It's funny. And man, when in doing research, sometimes I can go down a rabbit hole, and before I know, I'm like, man, I've been on this for 3 hours. But it's funny to look at that. But here's the thing. We look to place blame. And I think we all do it, you know. We blame a bad marriage on our spouse, but we're not willing to look at ourselves. I know a person that I love them to death, and he's been from job to job to job to job, and he's got a great job making some really good money, but he's still not happy, still not satisfied. Why? Because it's a bad place to work, because it's not managed well, because the employees are bad, because he has to do everything. And I told him, I said, you're going to be miserable for the rest of your life if you don't change your attitude. You see, that's what it's all about, is it not? Changing the way that we think, changing the way, we can't change all the time our circumstances, but we can change the way we react to things, and also the attitude that we have and how we think about that. You've probably heard of Viktor Frankl, who was a Jewish psychiatrist, and he was there in a concentration camp along with his whole family. He had a couple sisters and brothers. His parents, they were all there, and every one of them lost their lives except for him and his sister. Well, he wrote a book, but they interviewed him also, and there's a lot of material out there from him. And the thing that amazed everybody is that he had such a good attitude. And so this is a quote from him. Keep in mind what the man has gone through in a concentration camp. I can't even begin to imagine, and lost his whole family except for his sister. And he says, there was one thing they could not take away from me, and that was the freedom to choose my attitude. And so they can't take that away, no matter what goes on in life. Do you know anybody that's like that? That no matter what's going on in their life, that they still possess a good, positive attitude? My mama was like that, and I miss that so very much. And so we're challenged to be that way. Let's look at a second thing that Jesus said to try to avoid this victim mentality. Jesus says in verse 8, he says, pick up your bed and walk. Pick up your bed and walk. I don't know why he said that, but what it makes me think of is get to work. Find something to do. Now, I know this for a fact because I've read this in a lot of different places. I'm sure you have as well. That the more, if you are dealing with depression, you're going through hard times, and you're down on yourself, one of the best things you can do that's therapeutic, that will help you, is get involved in other people's life, right? Get up and do something. Stop feeling bad and sorry about yourself and for yourself, and get up and actually get involved in somebody else's life, you know, and it's amazing what it will do for you. And God has placed us in a family, you know, where it's a body, and we got a whole lot of parts that don't do anything, right? We got a lot of parts that do things, and we got a lot of parts that don't do anything at all. Wouldn't it be awesome if we all did that, if we all realized that, hey, I've got a job to do, so jump in and do something, right? Even if you're going through a difficult time, and that will help you get through that time. A third thing, and last thing that Jesus says that has to do with this, I think, mentality, or some lessons that we can learn, is found in verse 14. Third statement from Jesus. And there he just says, stop sinning lest something worse happen to you. Now think about this. He tells a guy that's been lame his entire life, stop sinning unless something worse happens. And you think, what in the world could be worse than not being able to walk your whole life? Well, obviously sin, right? I mean, it shows us the extent of sin and how bad it is, and it actually shows us the very root of all problems, I believe, and all evil is sin. And so stop sinning, okay? Self-pity, is it a sin or not? Yes, it is. It is. Now, it doesn't stand out in our mind as murder, as theft, as drug use, as adultery, fornication, all these other sins that are big name sins, if you will. But yes, to say, how in the world is self-pity a sin? It goes against everything that the gospel is about. Does it not? I mean, Jesus talks about, if you're going to follow after me, let him what? Deny self, right? Pick up your cross and follow me. Deny self. And as you read throughout the gospel accounts and you look at his ministry, it's all about people. That's what it's all about. And listen, as long as we have self-pity and we're constantly thinking about our problems, we do not reach out to other people, and we're not going to be involved in the Lord's church. And so we have to learn that it's not about me. It's about other people. And try our best to help others out the best that we can. Encourage people that are that way. And look in the mirror to see if you're that way. That's one of the hardest things to do. It's not about ourselves, it's about other people. It's about God ultimately, right? It's about him and it's about other people. The invitation is open to anybody who needs to ask for prayers of the Lord's church if you're dealing with something in your life. And we're talking about self-pity. And there's nothing wrong with feeling bad about something that you've gone through, a temptation that you've given into, a sin that you've committed, a rough patch in your life. There's absolutely nothing wrong with asking for prayers from the church. That's one reason we're here, right? What's wrong is to not get back on your feet and to make it about yourself and continue to be that way. But listen, as brothers and sisters in Christ, we're here for each other because we love each other. And we're all going the same place, and we want to help each other to get there. So if we can help you in any way, let us know. And we'll sing this song for our encouragement.